Oh, okay. So I gotta stop
You can
blaspheming
stop
and
talking
stuff
about
like
that.
that.
Stop talking about
Yeah.
that.
Sorry. I
Stop
have.
talking about your cocaine addiction, David.
It's
Time
not my fault. I drank like Coca-Cola classic when I was little, and it just started there.
Back when I had actual cocaine in it. All
Dude,
right, I see what
old
you
school
did
like the old school. You have no idea how great that ish makes you
I mean,
feel.
how old are you though? Was that even back in that day,
there.
or
No, no, he's definitely
just
not.
saying?
Not
Oh,
that old.
All right.
I've walked this world since before Horace.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, shoot! I should have sent you guys that video to watch while we were on break. That would have been hilarious. The Scar video or the Lion King video.
Oh,
Okay, yeah. So, Kara, when we're done, I'm actually going to send the video to both of you. You guys have to watch it and then immediately tell me your reaction to it because it's so.
Wait, you watched it
I
too.
can't wait all night. Oh, I watched it earlier today.
Oh.
So,
You realize
anyway.
9:30 is my bedtime. I don't know that I'm gonna make it much past this.
Mhm. All right, so I apologize for keeping you up. Okay, so now we're going to talk about false persecution or just persecution in general. Um, questions: what is persecution? And then we're going to look at persecution around the world, and then we're going to look at persecution here in America. So using the RG3 case as a case study. I don't know if you two were able to read both of the articles, but they're pretty different. It's like the difference between MSNBC and Fox News. It's just very different. So anyway,
yeah. I mean, looking at the URLs, it's kind of like, yeah, that's gonna be different.
yeah. So we're talking about persecution today, and so first question I want to throw out there is, what is persecution in a Christian in the Christian worldview and Christian understanding? Not speaking about just persecution for deeply held beliefs on something other than the Christian faith. I mean, what is persecution in regards to Christianity?
I would say it's being mistreated because of your faith.
Well, that begs the question of what is mistreated, though, because that's a tautology.
I would
Um,
say being treated badly. Is that better?
well, yeah, I feel like it's a bit more extreme than that. I kind of feel like it has to be, because like just treated badly, it's like what is badly? Like I make sarcastic comments to people who are being dumb because of their faith all the time. Um, I don't feel like I'm persecuting them. Um, Back in the day, I used to go around and argue with people on atheist forums, and there was a point where I was just blisteringly sarcastic. Um, it's I don't have a very clear definition of it because I'm going to run into tautology too. But it seems to me that persecution um, is it's I'd say there's sort of two nuances to it. The first one is it's sort of an oppression, um, a way which your either individual or social expression is directly assailed. Your tribe's right to have its own identity as its own tribe, or yourself having your right to have your own identity and your own self. Um, because no one's really an island, we're talking about really expression. Um, and what I'm sort of describing with that is that when we see persecution of Christians overseas, we're talking about if you become a Christian, you are persecuted in that you are ostracized entirely from the tribe. Your social connection is completely removed. You cannot express. Um, by comparison, um, if I walk into, um, I don't know, the Church of Scientology, and I'm wearing a WWJD shirt, and they say, hey, look, that's going to offend people. You can't wear that here. I'll think it's really dumb, but I don't feel like I'm being persecuted for not being able to wear a WWJD shirt onto their property. Um, and I kind of feel like that's like a really muddy thing because I kind of feel like according to the definition I provided, um, one is like they're kind of still the same thing, but there's a difference in severity. And the fact that while I can't express myself in the Church of Scientology, I can still express myself everywhere else.
Yeah, I think that there's when it comes to persecution, I've always thought that persecution required some form of physical oppression. I have since changed my view on that. I think that physical oppression certainly heightens the persecution. Like, I would say that African Americans in this country were persecuted by the level of, physical force used upon them. But I would also differentiate slavery from the traditional use of the word persecution. I would say that persecution then, I'm kind of rambling there, so let me get to the point. I would say that persecution is one person in power knowingly and willingly attempting to, or actually succeeding in, removing power from an individual or a group. And it can be groups that are persecuting other groups. It can be one group persecuting a person. It can be one group persecuting another group. I think that is what persecution is. And again, you're going to have to get down to the nitty-gritty and as to, is this persecution, is this not persecution, is this persecution, is this not persecution. But I really do believe that there is a dynamic of power that is challenging or taking away power or rights from someone else, or not affording someone opportunities. Like, I read a book by Randy Alcorn called Safely Home, and it was a fiction novel, but it was based, it was so compelling because it was based in reality. And this guy had gone to, I think, Harvard Business School with this brilliant Chinese student, and while the student was here in the United States, he came to know Jesus. He became a believer. And then he went back to China. Some years passed. They kind of fell out of contact. But this is the most brilliant Chinese guy this guy had ever met. So he went to China expecting him to be a tenured professor at this point, but he was a key maker. He made keys. And the reason why he made keys and was not a tenured professor is because in China, if you express your faith openly, you are blacklisted. You cannot get certain jobs. You cannot go to you can't live in certain places. You can't make certain amount of money. And so I think persecution, that's persecution. Much like you, David, not being able to wear my WWJD shirt at, in Scientology, the school of Scientology, whatever, or maybe even at my public school, I don't see that as persecution. But I'm comparing it to. So that might be coloring my view as to why I don't.
Could you say that it's like anytime that somebody's beliefs or authority or group would limit or erase another person's ability to practice their own faith or do actions, like it's anybody else taking and limiting somebody else for a particular reason or cause.
And I would feel like, in the case of the walking into another church's, the Church of Scientology wearing a WWJD shirt, I mean, I think just them saying, "Sorry, you can't wear that here," would not be persecution. Them, abusing you verbally because of wearing it, might be.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's weird because, even in a public school, I would say that being told you can't take a religious symbol to a public school because it could offend some people. I don't want people wearing symbols to Satanism to school. I just don't want that. I think that they're evil. That offends me. So if the government decides to cater to that, okay. And if along with that, my friends can't bring their crosses to school, I don't feel like that's really the end of the world. It's unfortunate. I kind of thinking about it, I really don't want the world to be that way. I'd rather just have free expression, but as long as it's consistent. I think that if you have in a public space, in a place where, okay, Christians, you can't wear your crosses, someone might find that offensive, but if you want to wear a swastika, go for it. Or if you want to, more simply put, if you want to wear some Hindu symbols, go for the Hindu symbols. If once you start doing that, it starts getting really, really, really muddy, because it's kind of like, when do you say that something's okay versus it's not okay? Hindu symbol's obviously a pretty good thing. Same with the cross. The swastika is not. But someone might say that their swastika is their religion. And for example, an inverted swastika, a swastika going the other direction, is not a swastika at all. It's a Buddhist symbol. but they can't wear it in this country because everyone thinks that it's evil. And are they being persecuted? It's an interesting thing because it makes me think that maybe rather than talking about persecution, we should be talking about just empowering other religions to express themselves, and that maybe if more people did that, there'd be less of a problem with everyone getting offended.
David, I follow your point there. However, I have to kind of disagree. For example, in the Muslim religion, the women wearing, and I forget the exact names, but they're wearing their get-ups as part of their religion. Okay.
The burqa?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so there are certain religions and certain things that we do wear that are sometimes part of that belief. So, yeah, I don't care sometimes if somebody wears this brand or if they wear a cross or they don't, or if they wear a Hindu symbol or if they don't. However, to have an authority come in and say you cannot wear anything that's related to that, okay, maybe it's on that border of just trying to keep peace, but also it can infringe on somebody's religious beliefs. So at that point, does it beg the question on oppression if it's part of that actual religious belief to wear those things?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I said it gets so muddy. I'd almost rather just have completely free expression, but then I know people would just abuse that too.
Yeah, it's really interesting how, I mean, obviously it gets mixed up here in America with syncretism and whatnot, and I do wonder if Americans really even understand, whether you're Christian or whether you're Muslim or whether you're Jewish, whether we truly understand what persecution is. When I look at things like ISIS over in the Middle East and they're like beheading children, I'm like, that's persecution. You not being able to wear your WWJD bracelet, in the lunchroom at school, that's not persecution. It might be an annoyance. You might feel slighted because you really, really love Jesus and you want to be able to express that with your wristband alone. But I wouldn't qualify that as persecution. Now, the interesting thing about it being here in America is a few years ago, there were some Muslim women who were up in arms about not being able to wear their headscarves on a roller coaster. And the policy of the amusement park that all head coverings had to come off. Not because we hate your religion, but because it's dangerous and you could be killed. Okay, it could snag on something, you could lose your life, you could lose your head. So it's easier for you to just take it off, enjoy the ride, or don't get on the ride. It's not about your religion. And so I think on something like that, I wonder if in America we've gotten so used to our rights that anything that comes against or seems to make us have to question our beliefs or seems to be against our belief in any way, shape, or form, that could be the only thing that's a violation of our rights versus it's a violation of our rights and our religion. Because I'm going, well, if you have to take your headscarf to get onto the ride, and that's the only way to get onto the ride, and it is so integral to your religion that you leave it on, then maybe you shouldn't be riding roller coasters.
Right? I mean, it's like, I don't know, having a firmly held religious belief is gonna mean there's just gonna be some things you can't do. Like, Calvin, I don't know if I'm completely on board with saying that WWJD is not persecution because there's worse persecution going on overseas. Because I'm thinking about it just in terms of this. You get a student body group which requires that its leaders have certain, not just being Christians, but have specific attestations of faith to lead the group. And they were written multiple letters by the head of school saying, look, you guys, you can't have that rule and receive school funding. You just can't do it. You can't be discriminatory in your leadership. Anyone who's a member in your group needs to be able to be a leader in your group. Or you can't receive this particular grant. It's just that particular grant they can't receive. And they of course went and changed their policy, and I think rightfully so. And the school had to obey its policy, I think rightfully so. So they're still allowed to meet on campus. They have to fund their own activities now. They don't get that grant anymore. And it's like, yeah, there comes a point where if you want to set yourself aside from the world, whether it be by having strict statements of faith or whether it be by wearing head covering, you're gonna be set aside. Like, that's not persecution, that's a choice you made to set yourself aside. Um,
It makes sense, doesn't it, that certain places would have rules within themselves, that a school would have a rule about what you can or can't wear in that school. If you were at a Christian school, they would have a different set of rules what you can and can't wear there. It makes sense that if you go into a grocery store, I don't know, it just makes sense to me that if you're in these public places, that it makes sense that if they wanted to set certain rules about what you could or couldn't wear there, you must have shoes and a shirt on, then it's their prerogative to set those rules. But it's not like, I mean, like you said, you don't have to shop there. I'm still in America. I'm still free. I can walk down the street and wear my whatever that I feel like I should have the right to wear.
well, even that's muddy, though, because you can still have that cross into persecution. Let's make it not about religion, but let's make it about culture. If you're part of a particular... Back in the day, there was some Polynesian culture do this. I don't know if they still do. But tattoo, the word tattoo comes from worship of a god named Tattoo. So some cultures, it was just a thing that they all had some kind of tattoo. Now, if you've been translocated from your parent culture into a new culture, and every single venue has got a thing where no visible tattoos. No one will hire you to have visible tattoos. You can't go here if you have visible tattoos. It's not something you can really change. It's part of your culture. And now it's severely limiting your options and where you're going. You've basically become an oppressed minority. It's not that anyone went out of their way to intend to oppress you. It's that the system inherently defavors you based on your heritage. And I think that that's, to a much more complicated degree, something which minorities face in America a lot. It's not necessarily something anyone's trying to set out to do, but there's certain cultural expressions which are just not accepted, but they're not accepted anywhere. And because they're not accepted anywhere, it's basically like society voted to oppress. That was what Jim Crow was. It wasn't that it was a legal requirement that blacks couldn't drink from water fountains. It was that just everyone decided to do it that way.
Okay, so point taken on that, and I don't want to go too far down that, but what I want to look at, because we've touched on it now, is do Christians in America seem to look for persecution? Because I mean we've touched on it a little bit. We brought up I haven't brought up this guy yet, RG3, NFL football player, right? And he went out of this game early. I guess he hurt his knee or something, and he turned his shirt inside out. He had a shirt on in the back, and it said, "No Jesus, no peace. No Jesus, no peace." Right, spelled different ways. And he was in the back, and because he was injured, when the game was over, he went up to the podium, and he had turned this shirt inside out. Okay, so you could still see the lettering, but it was turned inside out. And the reason that he did this is because if you were in the NFL, you cannot promote any other brand other than NFL. That is Nike. That is their prerogative. That is the contracts that they have laid out. Those are stipulations. This player has been fined $10,000 two times now for wearing Adidas. So rather than be fined again, he turned his shirt inside out. Okay, so the NFL has a rule saying you cannot wear anything but Nike, or at the post-game conference or whatever they do, the press conferences, they can wear a suit and tie, which is generally what they do. So that's what you read in the media pretty much everywhere. But I read in the Christian media almost to a person, like anywhere. I mean, you went to Christianity Today, International Justice Review, the Mad World Today, madworld.com or something like that. They were all like, oh my gosh, the NFL hates Jesus. They hate God. They're persecuting RG3. They made him turn his shirt inside out. See, they're godless. Look at this other person over here who wore a shirt that wasn't Nike at one time, and he got away with it. How come they're persecuting Christians? And regardless of whether somebody got away with wearing another shirt some other time and didn't get fined, that doesn't mean that Christians should, because that guy got away with it, well, we should act accordingly and just get away with it as well. That's the least you want to do to be a Christian witness. But I feel what came out of this for me is you look at the NFL rules, okay, whether they hold to them consistently. I mean, the NFL is not very good at holding to rules consistently lately, if anybody's been watching the news. But they have this rule in place. RG3 honored that rule. Christians are jumping on board and saying, this is persecution. This is persecution. When they could just look and see, this is what the NFL says. This is their rules. They're seeing it as persecution, which makes me ask the question, are Christians looking for persecution in places that persecution's just not happening? Because that's our story, and we have to feel persecuted in order to really, truly, madly, deeply be Christians, which historically there was a view that if you were not persecuted, you were not a Christian. That was, I want to say, early 1st and 2nd century Christianity. That was a big deal. But yeah, I wonder if Christians in America especially are looking for ways of being persecuted, even if they're not being persecuted.
I mean, I feel like not just Christians. I think a lot of people are looking for ways to feel persecuted, to feel offended, to feel victimized. So I guess the answer is I think yes. I think there are a lot of Christians that are looking for ways to read some form of persecution into a situation. I don't think they're alone in doing that.
I feel like I'm not 100% qualified to answer the question because Christianity is so big. But I will say that I would be not surprised if that were the case, and I would be bemused if that were never the case. And the reason I would feel that way is because it seems like when you have these definitions like conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist, liberal, Democrat, Republican, we divide very, very strongly into camps in America. And sociologically, camps are tribes. They're a system of ideals and rules which people bond over. People are tribal in nature, and the way which you set a tribe up is by defining it by what it's not, and the clearest way to define yourself by what you're not is to have enemies. And the clearest way to have enemies is to have an opponent. And what clearer opponent can you have than someone who is trying to destroy you? I wouldn't say it's a Christian thing. It's just so much a human nature thing that I think it requires a particular overwhelming blessing of the Holy Spirit to not do that. And I feel like that blessing of the Holy Spirit is a gift like speaking in tongues. Not everyone has that gifting to be pan-tribal. So I don't know, but I know that when I hear Christians talking about what persecution is going on in America, sometimes it sounds legit, sometimes it sounds like silly hats only club stuff.
David, just to chime in on that, I mean, not that there aren't some good points, but I also think that sometimes it's just not that complicated. And what I mean by that is I think that it's not a Holy Spirit issue. I think it's a logic issue. And just a simple it is or it isn't sometimes. I mean, maybe there are times where that is the case, but with this particular instance, I don't think that that is the case. I mean, if you look for persecution, here's the difference. Is it a rule that applies across the board to everybody? In the NFL, this rule applies across the board. It's not, if they had a rule that just applied to him, that would be a different argument. But this is an NFL rule, not just for him, for everybody. So I think that we are looking for it right here. If it was a rule that was made just for him and exclusively him, or you could make an argument that it was such, then I think it would be a different scenario. Maybe, maybe it requires higher authorities or the Holy Spirit and discernment and such, but it's not that complicated. I also think that as Christians, one of the biggest fallacies that we get into in this trap is that we sometimes forget that unless it is a government office, if it is a business, and the NFL is a business, you have the right as a business owner, you do not have to sell, and you can do things as the business owner that are different, and that's not always right. I'm not even qualifying owners as right when they do exclude things, but if I want to, as a business owner, put on that you have to wear a shirt to come in the store, that is not discriminatory as long as it's applied to everybody, and it's in my rights to do that. Now, if a government agency, such as a school, declares, hey, you can only wear things that are not this, this, or that, and makes that a rule for a public school, now that's a completely different issue. And I think that we muddy the waters by mixing up things far too often. For example, it is not discriminatory for a private school to say, hey, we have a uniform. Or you can't wear these things here because they're private. So when things become privatized, and businesses most commonly are, whether or not they're in the public eye is not a matter in whether or not they're a private business. That is a completely separate issue than being persecuted in America because of your government or your leaders.
No,
we could argue that the media persecutes. That's a different angle.
I'd like to jump in if you don't mind, because I kind of agree and I kind of don't agree, and I want to touch on something specific with that. You're right 100% that a business enforcing rules which it needs to do business is totally different from the government saying something. And when I don't disagree with that, but I think that it is completely possible to have private people do persecutory things. In Indonesia, it wasn't the government who killed Christians. It was the civilians who killed the Christians. I mean, it didn't, and that's what it was. It didn't magically not be persecution or discrimination because individuals or businesses were doing it. It doesn't.
And you're right on that, but the difference is when it's across the board versus just a certain section of people.
No, so I feel like that's not true. If I have got a 5-person family who goes to gay funerals and protests them, it doesn't matter how many Christians aren't doing that. That tribe is still persecuting. I agree with you 100%, by the way, that this NFL thing is not persecution. It's just silly to say persecution. But where I'm concerned about is saying that it's not persecution because it's not nationalized. The concept of persecution must be nationalized is just internationally false.
And that's not where I was trying to go with it on that, but I was just trying to clarify where where the consistencies are and not mix those up, I guess.
Well, and I wouldn't want to shoot you down either. I'd want to hear more about that, because it sounds like we have two different paradigms of consistency. And correct me if I'm hearing you wrong. We have a paradigm of consistency in America that because we have such a conversation of ideas and conversation of cultures, that really the only kind of persecution might be possible might be nationalized persecution. Whereas overseas, because you don't have this bigger conversation, you might have something which is more individual. Be able to where does the pattern arise from?
Well, I guess in this particular instance, trying to keep it to the fact that he, was he being persecuted? In America, I think that we do look for whether or not we are being persecuted, and oftentimes you see that in realms of politics and schools in particular where it's government, but you do see it in other instances, and I wasn't trying to say that they're not there, but I think that when we're talking about it, one of the things I see on Facebook, on media, or whatever, is that in our arguments, sometimes I feel like we lose the battle because we muddy the waters and we try to mix all of those things together. I don't have to shop at 7-Eleven if I don't agree with them, and I think that that's, just as an example, if they put up something that offends me, I don't have to go there. So the free enterprise and the free market, it doesn't negate some of it, but I also think that sometimes we confuse issues and we bind them together, and it makes our arguments weak as well.
I agree with that.
We do look for persecution, definitely, but that doesn't mean that persecution doesn't exist here, because it absolutely does. I mean, it's not to the extent that, I say across the board, it's not to the extent that it is in a lot of other countries. Obviously, we don't regularly have Christians being executed for their faith here, although, I mean, I'm sure it does happen that people are bullied, and I think that's a form of persecution. Persecution absolutely does happen in the United States. It happens in first world countries, because if we're going by the definition that it's hostility and ill treatment because of your religious beliefs, I just think there's no denying that happens. That comes from a place of sin, and sin hurts, and it's natural that we feel it. I don't think we have to trivialize persecution here because it's not as bad as it would be somewhere else.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I don't want this podcast to go the direction where we're like, oh yeah, because it's not people being beheaded and children being hunted down and stabbed and killed and all that kind of stuff, and it's not people being crucified, that it's not persecution. Oh, you were just bullied. That's completely different. I definitely do not want to degrade or downgrade the fact that people in this country are persecuted. What I think is problematic, what is a huge problem, and I don't think the word problematic or problem really capture the depth of the issue here, is it's when someone cries persecution and it's not persecution, it's like a woman who is upset with a guy claiming she was raped by that guy when she wasn't. It does a disservice to all the women who actually are raped. So when someone calls persecution when it's not persecution, like I think International Justice Review should apologize for putting out the article. I think that Christianity Today should apologize or print a retraction for jumping to conclusions about persecution, because it does a disservice to those who are in America. And yeah, we're not getting beheaded. Great, we live in a country where that's not a problem. But when people in America actually are persecuted in some way, shape, or form, when their religious group isn't allowed to be on campus, but all these other religious groups are allowed to be on campus, when someone loses a job because they wear a cross at work. These are things that do happen in the United States, so it's not to the level. But I think when people like International Justice Review, who do a lot of good work, and Christianity Today, who do a lot of good work, but when people this big, this large, or don't even have to be large, when someone cries wolf, it does a disservice to people who are being attacked by wolves. Mm-hmm. And I think that's my issue with people crying persecution when persecution exists for real, but not in their situation.
Thank you, Calvin, because it's kind of, I think, what I was trying to say a little bit, but you said it much better, is that I think those things are very real, but I also think that sometimes we disservice ourselves and our message by choosing battles with lack of wisdom, shall we say, or lack of investigating the truth, because then our voice is out there and it just looks so silly to the public that reads all of those other stories and validates their facts. And I think we lose our voice and we lose our strength, so to speak, because people only listen so much.
Right. It stops being real persecution. Mm-hmm. People don't listen to you when you have real persecution, and then it becomes, oh, Christians have a victim mentality.
Mm-hmm. Guys, did you pick up on kind of touching on that? And Jen, I thought that was a really valid point too, which you made about it just trivializing it. But it seems like a lot of times when we hear this, like the qualifying statement is that, well, he had turned his shirt inside out, someone else got away with it. It's like, really? When we're talking about persecution, is the argument really, well, that's not fair? Johnny didn't have to clean up his room? Like, I feel like that's something a 5-year-old would say, not the church.
And we'll end right there. That is a great, it's a great line. That's a great one-liner, and we will end it right there. I feel like we overtalked Kara a little bit. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Sorry, Kara. And
no, sorry. I could have jumped in if I wanted to. I was enjoying your debate.
our banter.
Yeah, okay. The banter, yes.
I'm going to stop the recording. Hold on.
Hey, Jen, I want to say I'm sorry I missed your point that first time around. I